Welcome to the Creative Chats podcast with Mike Brennan. Hey, welcome friends to another episode of Creative Chats. It's the podcast for artists, makers, and creative thinkers where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. My name is Mike Brennan. I'm your host. You can connect with me over on my website, which is mikebrennan.me. You can check out the resources I've created with you as a creative person in mind, because I've been on this journey for a long time and have experienced a lot of things that have been pitfalls and joys along the way. And I create resources to help you stay engaged with your creativity. So I'm rooting for you. I think that when you create, we all win. You win because you're doing the things that you love to do, that light you up, that make you curious and create things that have your fingerprints and put it out into the world. And the people around you win because they get to be recipients of your creativity and creative expression and work. And so I am always championing people to embrace their creativity, their creative journey. And man, is it a journey. A lot of times there's ups and downs, but we're all in this together. Now, today I have the privilege of sitting down with the writer of the Brink of War film that is coming out August 14th. And that is Michael Russell Gunn. And Michael and I sit down and talk about his creative process in filmmaking. We talk about his process in the writing when it's based on true events of President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev sitting down in the 80s for this summit, and really the tension of a time when everyone had their fingers on the nukes and trying to find a way forward to understand how we can build bridges as opposed to burn them. And the storytelling is great. The performances are amazing by Jeff Daniels and J.K. Simmons and also Jared Harris, among others. I highly encourage you, go see this film. You may learn some things that have happened in history and in my lifetime. I was younger, didn't really know a lot of these things were actually happening. You read headlines, you see the news, but there is always another story. And that's one of the things I appreciate about Michael is his hunger to find those stories and to create around those stories and bring things like this film to us today. So I'm going to get out of the way. Without further ado, here is my creative chat with Michael Russell Gunn. Well, Michael, welcome to the Creative Chats podcast. Thanks so much for taking time to be here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking about the film, obviously, the Brink of War, but also getting to know a little bit more about you as a creative person, your journey, your process. And so it's always exciting for me to be able to talk to fellow creative people and find those places where it's like, there's stuff that's happening behind the scenes that you would never know that contribute to what it is that we create and make, right? I would love to know, just starting off, if there's something maybe that when you were younger, maybe you were a kid and you had a certain creative exercise or activity that you love to do. Is there an experience that you remember that comes to mind when I ask you that question? That's like, oh, this told me that like I was a creative person.
Oh boy, that's a great question. I don't know that I can speak to a specific instance. I can tell you for sure. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, South Carolina, and my mother didn't believe in television so much. Like, we weren't just left to watch television all day. We were kind of like kicked out of the house onto the farm, either to do farm work or just kind of wander around the woods. And so what I know for sure is that my imagination was built, wandering around the woods by myself or with the dog or whatever. And that was just, finding adventure. Always, one of my formative memories was coming across what I now know to be a still. Some moonshiners had left a still because there were still blue laws and things like that when I was growing up. And so this was just this like rusted old contraption that I found in the woods. And I came home and kind of described it to my parents. And they were like, well, you don't need to go there again. You don't need to go that particular holler again. So yeah, I would say that just wandering around and to this day, still, it's a practice that I have that before I go off and write a feature, My wife calls it going into the woods for 3 or 4 days, but I go off to a national park and just disappear for 3 or 4 days, clear my brain, and then come back and write.
Hmm.
So it's a process I keep.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. When you find something that works for you and you lean into it, you do it with intention and purpose, and then it,
100%.
it cuts through all the noise and the clutter, and helps you get right to work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
and I, it's probably one of two things that really unlock that kind of like creative spark in the process, because it's sitting down and facing that blank page is intense sometimes. But going away in the woods is one, and the other thing was finding that song that repeats. I've heard a lot of people do this, but it definitely works for me. It's just like I can't actually write until I find the song
Hmm.
that turns it on and turns, and then it's on repeat for the length of the project. The problem is, Mike, is that once you do that, then if you ever hear that song again, it always transports you back to that.
Right.
So, and I've written to some really incongruous, I guess is the right word, stuff. At Black Sails, I was on this TV show, Black Sails for Stars. I wrote everything I wrote for Black Sails to the Taylor Swift 1989 album. And I can't explain why. There's no connective tissue. That was like Sexy Pirate in the 1800s or whatever, and Taylor Swift. But it worked. So thanks to Taylor for helping me through Black Sails. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So was writing something that you always knew that you wanted to do? And did you like basically just aim yourself towards it and say, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure this out. There's no plan B, right?
pretty much. I mean, I was writing. I started out writing novels when I was really young, like 15. I think was the first time I started one, and then I finally finished one when I was 19. And then just kept writing them, and then I just, I never really connected, whether, I don't know why, to be perfectly honest with you. I never really know why. But then I had this professor who kind of changed my life, because she read my work and she said, I actually think your words are meant to be spoken and not read. And that was kind of revelatory to me. So I kind of like put that kind of vision and dream aside and went to film school. And that was really the kind of turning point that got me into film and TV.
Hmm. Yeah. Sometimes we have those divine moments where someone speaks a word into and says, hey, have you considered this? Or they present an opportunity,
Yeah,
and it can be all the difference in our journey and the work that we create, and shapes how we create it, right? I
a
mean,
100%. And it's really being open and listening for those things, I think, is a real lesson that I've tried to carry with me. It came all the way down even to this film, where our cinematographer is Polish. She grew up behind the wall, and hearing her talk about her experiences was really informative to the process with the cast, because she was talking about experiences where I think in the West we have this tendency to think of Gorbachev. Our film follows this journey between Reagan and Gorbachev, and Gorbachev is kind of a saintly figure who wouldn't use force to enforce the Soviet rule, and so the Soviet Union came to end, and it was peaceful. And for real reasons, I think he's a hero of mine, and justifiable. But she came from the other side. She grew up behind the wall, and she said, this guy was in power for many years, and people are still going to the gulag. He's not 100% a saint. And so for me to hear that, for Jared Harris, who was playing Gorbachev, to hear that, there was this thing that was her point of view. And so being open to those kinds of things, whether they're life changing things like that professor who changed my life, or it's that kind of thing on set, being open, having the confidence, I would say, to really be open to incoming advice or thoughts or point of view, is kind of critical to
yeah,
creative endeavor.
yeah. So in terms of the Brink of War, how did you come to be a part of the project?
Well, I originated it. It was a story told to me by George Shultz, who was Secretary of State at the time at the event. And, I kind of developed it listening to him, reading the real transcripts. He gave me the declassified transcripts, and reading every book I could get my hands on about it. And then the process, so I'd written it and years went by, and I was doing this show in Thailand, of all places. I was doing this show for Netflix and about the rescue of the boys trapped in the cave. And the financier of that show was also one of the financiers of my film. And we were kind of in our last week, and I was show running, and we were running around crazy. And he said, you've done a pretty good job on this. Like, what do you want to do next? And I was like, well, how do you feel about Iceland? Like, we've been in the jungle, so how do you feel about going to Iceland? And so he read the script, and again, we talk about that being open and being ready, and that was a script that was ready for years before he asked that question. And just being open to it and having that moment and being prepared for it. And then I pitched him the whole thing, and he said, okay, let's try to figure it out. And that was the origins of the Brink of War getting done.
That's amazing. I love that. And the preparedness. I mean, you're so right. That's key, because when you have those moments, you don't want to be caught unprepared.
No.
That's the worst thing, I think.
No, I sometimes tell younger writers that, you know, you get a lot of advice, I think, sometimes in the entertainment business about like when you should write something, do you write it on spec, or not? And I think one of the things I've found is that like I've never really gone wrong just writing something that I love. Even if it doesn't get made, it gets you noticed because it's something you're passionate about that comes through in the work. And, and Schultz actually had this phrase called best prep wins, which which my assistant directors definitely loved. They love that. But it was really, true that, being prepared for those moments was great. I've had tons of things that never even sold, but certainly never got made that I did sell, all of which have taken me somewhere, right? They've all taken me somewhere. So I would say, in terms of the creative side of it, you chasing that and doing the work is never not going to pay off.
Hmm. Yeah. Was there something in particular that drew you to this, that said, like, this is a story that needs to be told and needs to be told now?
Well, I mean, look, I wish I could say I timed it. I developed it for years, and then, we shot it almost 2 years ago now. And so I wish I could say I timed it, because now we've got Ukraine going on and Iran going on, and we've got all these things in the world that are nuclear related. And certainly this is a story about nuclear disarmament, but really truly I think the core values of it are universal and timeless, which is just being willing to talk to an adversary, to have a conversation with somebody that you disagree with. I think sometimes those really difficult conversations in life are the most important ones, whether they're with your family, your community, your neighbors, geopolitically. That those are the important things. And that's when I talked to the cast, that was really what we talked about, was that these were two people who really, really disagreed. I mean, they had their fingers on the button to point at the other person and the other world, the rest of the world, and so their ability to have that kind of confidence and courage to reach out and to talk to one another and find a way forward, that was really inspiring. And I feel like that's something we all need right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And someone who's visually oriented, I really appreciate it, even in the film, where the cinematography reflected that, where there were certain scenes where it's the split screen,
Mhm.
and then you have this, as things are coming together, the actual, it almost looks
Yeah,
like the table is shortened.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
was like, oh, that is such an, I love that visual effect reflecting what's happening in the room,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, we talked a lot about that in prep. My cinematographer and I were trying to figure out like how do you physically bring them together in a way. And it was, visually it was part of our cutting pattern. The way we shot it was in the cutting pattern in the edit bay, and trying to really figure out this story because, look, Mike, I don't have explosions. I don't have car chases. What I've got is these performances, and these performances are incredible. They crushed it. The cast is incredible, but really it was about capturing that. How do you capture that, and how do you capture that sensation of drawing people together? And so I'm thrilled to hear it worked for you.
Yes, yeah. And to like your point, the performances, I mean, Jeff Daniels and J.K. Simmons and Jared Harris, I mean, and as well as the whole cast really, but those in particular, when they're on screen, there is an authority and a weight to their craft as they show up. Was having them be a part of the film, was there any part that was like, oh, this is who I want for this, or they sought you out? Like, what happened in that part as far as the casting?
Well, it was, it's a total indie movie. Nobody did it for the money, and they all did it for love of the game. Really, truly, they did it for what the story was. That it was I think a challenge. Especially both Jeff and J.K. really mentioned that they were seeking a challenge, and this was certainly a challenge. And I think the message that we talked about, the message that we should be hopeful that if we work together, even with people we disagree with, that we can reach a better result and make a better, safer world. So I think they showed up for that. And I think they committed to that in a way. And in terms of whether it was, me versus them, it was definitely me going to them. It's my first time directing. And so it was definitely me going to them, cap in hand, saying, I don't know how you feel about being cold for 4 or 5 weeks, freezing in northern, the North Atlantic. But, here's your chance. And it's going to be cold and dark and it's going to be great. And, they were really up for that. And so I'm really grateful to them. They all brought it. And I had first met Jeff on the Newsroom. That was my first show. And I met him and he was just doing these incredible Sorkin, dial and monologues and just incredible things. And that really blew me away. And so I knew he could do it. The question was really, does he want to do it? And luckily he did. And all of them committed, their creativity and their craft all the way through. They just, hours and hours for each of them every day in the makeup chair and months working on their accents and, all that kind of stuff. So it was really a commitment. And, when you're doing a small movie, there's not a lot of time, so you have to show up and be ready, take one, take two. And they all did. They all really brought it. And it went all the way down the cast because, Aya Cash, who plays this reporter, she was literally flying from London to New York for a press tour. She stopped in Iceland for 2 days, shot her scenes out, and then got back on the plane and left. And I wrote the role for her. So how, that's a dream scenario, right? I write this role, she shows up, she does it, she crushes it, and she walks away. And so all the way down the line, everybody really showed up.
Yeah, yeah. And in particular, even with when you're portraying real people, uh, there's a fine line sometimes, I think, between bringing something that is your own as an actor and then also like the I'm impersonating, right? And certainly with some real life people, there are more things that can become caricatures, and as opposed to not. And I think they all did a great job in embodying the person and even some mannerisms and some vocal inflections and such, but not ever feeling like, oh, they're impersonating.
Yeah. Well, we talked a lot about it. I'm pleased to hear you say that because we talked a lot about it. Especially with Jeff. He's so well known for comedy, and one of the first things he and I talked about was if we go too far, this is going to be caricature, right? It's going to be SNL. And he's so well known for comedy. So one of the things we talked about a lot was just suggesting Reagan. I kept using this word suggesting. And so we want to suggest Reagan. And so he worked for months on those mannerisms that you're talking about for the accent. And same thing with Jared. Jared spent months with a dialect coach working on that and really focusing in on what the core was of those two people so that they could embody them without going, fully to a different place. And I think the other thing that is kind of, I think one of the things that I didn't even fully appreciate myself, again, this question of being humble and being open to things, was the dynamic between them in the room. In certain cases, just Jeff and Jared, in some cases, JK and Jeff and Jared, but them being open to each other and just living in that space together. We shot in the real house, right? In the real chairs. The poor sound team had to deal with these squeaky chairs from 40, 50 years ago. But we shot in this place and these guys all kind of came into being. And there was this one moment I remember where, Jeff was getting there and JK just turns like, you okay, boss? In that kind of like Secretary of State to President way. And it was just like, it clicked and he was just in. And so it was just one of these things that I think they all kind of were there for each other. Jared showed up on JK's last day, showed up on Jeff's last day. He just to be there for each other. And that was really amazing to see.
Yeah. And that's it takes a village, right? To create
100%.
this. Yeah. Yeah. It's
100%.
great when you hear experiences and stories like that, because that's the stuff that sometimes people are left wondering, going like, was this just people dropping in, doing their thing, and then kind of leaving and going, okay, I'm
Yeah.
done. My part's done here,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it was that ethos, like, I was joking about it, but it was really true. You're on this tiny little island, I think the population of Iceland is around 300,000 people. It's a tiny little island in the middle of the North Atlantic. And, we were filming in the autumn. We were losing an hour of light per week. So it gives you a sense of how fast we were losing the light every day. So it was cold and dark, and, you had to be there for the love of the game.
Yeah. That's the stuff you don't put in the brochure to be like,
Yeah.
hey.
Yeah, come to Iceland, Jeff. Come to Iceland, JK.
Right.
You're going to have, we'll promise you a really warm trench coat for the 60-mile-an-hour winds. But yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of like taking something that is obviously historical and true, real accounts with real people, how do you take that and then also go, okay, this is obviously a movie. There needs to be
Yeah.
cinematic elements beyond what is happening in the moment to moment and day to day. Can you talk a little bit about your process of culling through your resources and the actual facts, and then going, okay, now take this and have some creative license in places?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, creative license is always one of those things that I try to keep an eye on. I do a lot of true stories, at least on the writing side. And it's one of those things it can get really complicated really quickly. You sometimes lawyers involved, some the studios involved, the producers involved, and they all have an opinion about where that line lies. In this case, I think it was actually remarkably easy in the sense that we had the transcripts. So I had been given the transcripts by Schultz, and I used those as the blueprint for the script. And so it was very easy to be able to say, no, they actually said this, right? Like, hey, this actually happened. And so that helped a lot. The other thing that helped was that in shaping the dialogue and shaping the scene work, the most of it was informed by some facet of their characters. So for instance, I had to invent the interactions with the first ladies, with Nancy Reagan and Raisa Gorbachev, because we're obviously not privy to their conversations. There's no transcript of those. So I had to figure out what would they have been talking about. And one of the beautiful things about these two guys was they actually loved their wives. Shocking that these politicians actually enjoyed being around their wives. They sought them out as advisors. And so it was about trying to figure out, well, how do you portray that? And so little things like, okay, we know they must have talked. How did they talk? Where did they talk? So putting Nancy in a bedroom, for instance, waking up, right? She's 3 hours or 5 hours behind. She's waking up to the news from Iceland. Same thing with Raisa and Mikhail in a bathroom together, is about as intimate as you can get. And so really trying to figure out the spaces and the ways that, did they actually do that? I don't know. But I'd like to think that they did. It seems like they did. And so that's kind of where the line is.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, as for somebody who lived through this, but wasn't really aware of what was going on, and certainly not to the details of what you're portraying, it's interesting for me to go, oh, okay, like there was a lot more happening there than I was glued into at a
Yeah.
younger age. And so I kind of appreciate that, these are things that happened. There were headlines, there were newspapers, and even now in, history books or whatever, right? That makes you feel old. But to have another source that like this film, I think is great, because it really sheds light on a lot of detail and nuances of story that you maybe even didn't even think about, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I admit I didn't know. I was a history undergrad, and I didn't know about this story. So I think it's one of those things that I hope people go to the theater for, in part to learn something they've never heard about, never seen before. I'm the guy who goes to see Pressure and Nuremberg and all these kind of historical films because I'm very curious about how they're treating the subject. And so that's definitely, my version of that is saying, hey, you probably have heard about Reagan and Gorbachev. You probably knew they were friends. How did they become friends when they clearly disagreed about everything? Well, this is how. This moment in time is how. And not only that, but now knowing about it, I think it's one of the greatest diplomatic achievements in human history. It's shocking to me that this isn't, as you said, taught in history books every day. So it's one of those things that's just an opportunity to really look at why. Why is it forgotten? Why is it important? And it's incredible. These guys came together and eventually signed the first arms reductions agreements in human history. Going back to the bow and arrow. So it's really spectacular.
Yeah. And not to go like into the land of politics today so much, but I think having stories like these are important also because it does reflect some things that maybe we've lost sight of and need to bring back front and center. And stories of hope and of togetherness, building bridges. And I think we can never have enough of those type of stories to keep before us to learn from, and then also to say, what can I take from that and bring today? What's my role in that right
Yeah.
now? Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I think we're desperate for them. And I think there's a craving amongst the audience for them. I think that I sense it with young people, with older people who maybe remember it more. I get asked a lot about this film and, well, how will it appeal to people who don't remember it or young people? And I said, like, from my personal perspective, when I talk to young people, they're desperate to understand, number one, how we got here. And number two, how do we get back to a place of unanimity? How do we get back to a place of working together to solve problems? And so I sense a real optimism or at least hunger for that. And I hope that this film, fulfills that. I hope people go and see it and take that away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that that is there for people to be able to experience and then draw their own conclusions as to what they want to take with them as they
Yeah,
leave the theater.
absolutely.
Was there anything that happened during the production of this that was a surprising thing that you were like, here was a benefit of this, or here was something that happened that I could never have planned for, and it just now it's a story that you can share.
Well, you talking about the production specifically or just about the story in
Well, just
general?
just really the production mainly, just because I know when you're in there, you have a plan, you
Hmm.
go and say, here's what we're going to do, and then you're having to be a little more open handed with some things because variables happen.
For
Um,
sure.
and
For
so
sure.
I always think that way in terms of you have your plan, but then you have to be loose. And there are sometimes stories that emerge from that, sometimes good, sometimes not so good, but nonetheless.
You're 100% right. I'm trying to remember who it was. Was it Mike Tyson? Somebody said that like everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face for the first time.
Yes.
Right? And I love that phrase. It's a great production phrase because everybody's got a plan until the weather turns on you or whatever. Um, yeah, I mean, we had definitely our fair, share of challenges and things like that. I think, you know, the one that stands out in my memory was that I had a very specific shot planned to open the film. That was a steady cam shot that kind of wrapped around Jeff and everything. And basically what happened was is that the house that this all took place in, the real house is still there. If anybody gets a chance, if you're listening out there, if you get a chance to go to Reykjavik, definitely go see the house. It's crazy. The whole town has grown up around it, but they preserved it, which is really beautiful. But in the intervening years, in the last 40 years since this event, they put essentially a freeway out in front of it between the house and the shore. It used to not be there. So the question for Jeff was, how is he supposed to act with a freeway outside? So we very fortunately got the support of the Reykjavik city government to close that street for, juggle our schedule, close it on, I think, a Saturday afternoon when it was the lightest traffic. And then the question became, well, how are we going to shoot this? Because at that moment in time, we had 60-mile-an-hour winds. And so the Steadicam couldn't stay steady long enough out on this platform to get the shot. And so we tried it once, twice. The guys are freezing. Jeff and JK are freezing. They've only got this thin trench coat around them. And what do we do? And so what we did was we put a kind of makeshift windbreak around the Steadicam operator to try to get him as much coverage as we could. And I think it was the sixth take, we got it. We nailed it. Jeff nailed the performance. We got it. And of course, the rain started, so there's rains coming down on these guys. And after all of that, everybody wanted one more for safety. But I just had the sense that we caught magic in that moment. And I got in the edit bay and I looked at the take and it was perfect, Mike. It was a perfect take. You never get these, right? And we got a perfect take. Steadicam nailed it. Jeff nailed it. It was perfect. And for better or for worse, it didn't work in the cut. It was too long. And what I realized was I had designed this shot and done all this work and we'd done everything. And it was taking too long to get to the meat of the scene. So luckily, just luckily, the Steadicam operator had rolled before the start of action. So we cut in on that shot. We punched in on that shot in order to get the sequence to work that now opens the film. And if you go to see the film, you'll see that the rest of the shot is Steadicam, but not that opening. And so that was an example to me, a very humbling example of like, you do all this prep, but like once you get in the edit bay, that's where the truth comes out. And so that's like, I would say, the example of being humble enough to be open when, once you get the shot you thought you had.
Yeah. Yeah. I enjoy hearing accounts and stories like that because that's the stuff that goes into the creative process. And most of the time people just get to see whatever the final product is and result. And I'm somebody who appreciates the final version so much more when I know, oh, this is the odds of this. This was
Yeah.
what went into this,
Yeah.
and the missteps and the happenstance and all the things that go on through the course of that. I find that fascinating.
And for your students of cinema out there, if you guys are really paying attention, because this came up in shooting, it was the next to last day with Jared. We had not used Steadicam at all with him. And I was shooting his opening scene in the film with Steady. We brought in Steadicam. And he's like, "Oh, why are we doing this? Are we worried about time? What do we?" And I told him the only two shots, Steadicam shots in the entire film, are the opening with Reagan and the first shot with Reagan and the first shot with Gorbachev. Because I wanted to bring the audience in a way that only really Steadicam can do. It can bring the audience in a fluid motion and move them. And so the rest of the film, we're on sticks, we're on dolly, whatever. But those are the two shots that are steady. And that's for that purpose, to use it as an emotional pull to draw you in, whether you subconsciously get it or not. And if nobody else there gets it, then I guess it's just me.
Yeah, I love it though. I love that all of this goes into the craft of filmmaking and the intention and the purpose behind things that maybe the average person might not know, but that just speaks to the level of craft and care in the storytelling. So I appreciate that. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So with this now, what comes next? Is there something else that you're thinking, like, here's another story that I'm looking to tell, if you can, or some other forum or venue that you're thinking, I would really love to do this, lean into this, and continue to grow as a creative person?
Great question. There's two things that come to mind. One, in terms of growth, I'm writing my first play ever for Broadway, which I'm really excited about. It's called The Birth of Loud. It's based on a great book, and Ian Holt, and it's a true story of how these two guys, Les Paul and Leo Fender, invented electric guitar and therefore rock and roll and so on. And so stretching to do something I've never done before, a play, is really exciting to me. And in the feature world, I'm always just chasing the story that inspires me. And so whether that's writing or directing, I'm chasing the story that inspires me and hopefully inspires the audience. I don't know what that will be, but I'll come back and tell you, Mike, when I find out.
Well, I look forward to that for sure. I want to thank you so much for our time today and for you sharing about the film, sharing about your journey. The film comes out in theaters August 14th, right? And
Yes.
we're encouraging everyone to go see it in the theater because there is nothing like the theater experience. And
Here,
man,
here.
I can just say, when you have the screen and the speakers and the people, the audience interactions, you experience it in a way that just is not the same as sitting on your couch.
Here, here. Well,
Yeah.
listen, one of the reasons we chose the distributor we chose is they were offering us the widest possible release. I agree with you. I believe in the theatrical experience, and I hope everybody coast to coast goes to see it on August 14th.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again. And I wish you all the continued success. And again, go see the film in the theater. Michael, thank you so much for our time today.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.